Hi everyone, this is Sara Rafael Garcia. I'm here in my home office, getting ready to welcome everyone to our info session for our upcoming anthology. So I'm just looking. Oh, I see some folks already checking in. So waiting to see them watching, and once I hear from Sara, from Matt, and Alex, I'll have them join our conversation. There you go.
Wow. Okay.
Yay!
Thank you.
So that and that gives anybody that's watching through Libro.vid has a good idea who I am. But I'm a multimedia artist, author of Santana's Fairy Tales, and this whole conversation for me started because I met Matt at AWP a few years ago, when the first book that you edited, Matt, right, of Latinx
Yeah.
Rising. And then that's how our conversation started. And through Matt, I met Alex, and then this year, Sara, who's one of our former contributors of speculative fiction for Dreamers. So got to meet your work on the page first, and then now meeting you visually, right? But I'll start with introduction so that everybody has an idea of the co-editors. And then I'll hand it over to Matt and Alex to keep talking about the project. So Matthew David Goodwin is an assistant professor in the Chicana O Studies Department at the University of New Mexico. His research is centered on Chicanx, Latinx speculative fiction, in particular how Chicanx Latinx writers are using science fiction, fantasy, and digital culture to explore migration. His study, The Latinx Files, Race, Migration, and Space Aliens, was released through Rutgers University Press in 2021. His research is intertwined with work as an editor and translator of fiction anthologies. He is the editor of Latinx Rising, an anthology of Latinx science fiction and fantasy, and the co-editor of the collection Speculative Fiction for Dreamers, both with Ohio State University Press. And Alex, I don't think I got your bio. Hurry, send it to me.
So
I'll read that. Huh?
I can just intro myself really quickly.
Okay.
So I'm a librarian and a library director. I also I'm Cuban American, born and raised in Miami. Work in Hialeah. Hialeah is, I think, according to Wikipedia, 95% Latinx. So I've been very immersed in that culture and in that community. I love science fiction. I've always loved this. So I write science fiction and I read science fiction. Growing up, I always wanted to see more characters that look like us in the books and the movies. So that's how I met Matt. Kind of like what you said. I met Matt during the Latinx Rising, book, and then we were talking about the other anthologies since then. So I don't want to spoil too much because I don't want to steal Matt's thunder. But that's what we've been talking about now for, I want to say, 10 years. It seems that way.
All right,
Yep.
great, thank you. And then Sara, I just want to make sure because I've never said your name out loud. It's Sara Daniel Rivera. Okay, great. Sara Daniel Rivera is a Cuban Peruvian American artist, writer, translator, and educator. Her poetry and fiction use both speculative and realist lenses to explore themes of migration, memory, and the liminal spaces between language and silence. Her drawings and sculptural installations focus on text and space as social intervention and are often developed through community-based collaborations. Her debut book of poetry, The Blue Mimes, will be published by Grey Wolf Press in 2024. Yay! Congratulations. And then, I'm really excited to host this conversation through Libro.vid because sci-fi is something that we definitely carry on a regular basis, and we want to definitely engage these conversations with our community. And everybody that's listening today that's hoping either has already contributed or is hoping to meet the new extended deadline of August 15th. So Alex and Matt, you want to give us a little bit of background how this project came to be?
Yeah. Well, I should say, first of all, thank you, Sarah, for setting this up. As you can tell, even though I've been on Instagram for a while, I still figure it out. At any rate, I'm so happy that this team is together, and it's such a good group of people, and I feel very lucky because of that. Latinx Rising, speculative fiction for dreamers were more or less kind of general anthologies. You know, we kind of took what we liked, what we wanted. You know, um, but Alex and I had been kind of batting the idea around for a while of doing some kind of themed anthology, or trying to see, you know, what we could come up with, and so, you know, we started thinking about this kind of like alternate utopian genre that is sort of coming out a little bit, and you know, my life sort of took over my life, and so, you know, we put it on hold for a while, but we're sort of back, and it's really exciting to get into this. The problem is that utopian fiction was originally, you know, used as a tool of genocide. You know, the Thomas More's original Utopia, you know, is set somewhere in the Americas, and it's this kind of really industrious town, city, and it's they have a kind of mandate to kill the indigenous people if they're not using the land according to their standards. And I mean, that's America. This is America. You know, it's founded on that kind of genocidal utopian thinking, and it's manifest destiny. You know, and I think that's a problem. You know, for utopian thinking, and in a way, that's why dystopian thinking and fiction and film is so important, because it kind of gets under that. Just thinking about Sleep Dealer, the Alex Rivetta's film Sleep Dealer, you know, it's is looking at well, there's a point where the manager of the factory says that they want all the work but not the workers, and that basically is the kind of American dream as it's been. So, you know, we were trying to figure out, you know, what can we do? And honestly, it's still a question. We don't know. We don't know what we're going to get. I've been kind of thinking about Sherry Moraga's play, Hungry Woman. And what's interesting about that one is that, you know, she's kind of setting up not a utopia, but a kind of like a way of life. And so this is a play where the United States is broken up into different nations, and there's Aztlan, and it becomes kind of like a homophobic state. But Moraga kind of has this other state that's happening, which she calls queer Aztlan in one of her essays. But it's not really a nation per se. It's just kind of like an energy. It's a way of life, and I think that's kind of what we're after. I don't know what y'all think of that, but in a way, like looking more for a utopian impulse or a desire. I guess thinking about Jose Munoz and his kind of like thinking about utopian hope, utopian desire, and as opposed to like an institution. And a lot of utopian fiction is about kind of like the details, you know, like how are we going to create the perfect state, you know, and so that's why it's not your Papi's Utopia. That's one of the meanings of that. It's trying to kind of like, it's utopian energy, utopian desire, but not utopia per se. I think that's kind of what we're after, right, Alex?
Yeah. So one of the reasons we kind of lean toward utopia as opposed to dystopia, I feel like if you've already been like ground down by the news, you know, and by Twitter and or what X or whatever it's called now, I think dystopia has won. You know, it's winning, and almost to inoculate ourselves, but also our readers and our community from that, right? So they can keep going and keep dreaming and keep, imagining a better future. We wanted them to get creative and almost as an act of survival to try to imagine a more, utopian future. And it could be like a pocket within a dystopia, right? It could be as realistic or as grand as they want to make it, or they need to make it in order to make themselves feel better so they can move forward. But there was a little bit of that pushback against that dystopia that seems less like science fiction and more like just reality at this point.
Yeah. No, and the other bit that I was thinking about is the novel Ink by Sabrina Vorvolius.
Yeah.
Which is it's a great novel, and one of the things that really comes out of that is it's set in the future. It's kind of like an immigration dystopia, but it's really strongly centered on solidarity. So all these different groups within this little story, they kind of put aside their differences to work together, to protest, to get the immigration laws repealed. And so for me, that energy, that kind of it's not meant to set up a utopia, but it has deep hope, deep hope that things can change,
Yeah, definitely. So now that we know a little bit of the theoretical background of this, right? Like, I would like to pose a question to all of us that we can have an open conversation so that the audience has a better idea of what we want for this particular project. Because to me, that same thing, that the call to radical hope was exciting for me, because we have enough of the dystopia in our headlines and our daily lives, and even in our daily microaggressions that we face, right, as people of color or as women. So I want to know what excites you about this project, and what do you hope to receive in submissions that will be different from the past anthologies, right? And I don't know, Sada, if you want to lead this, and you're new to this part of the process of the anthology, but you're also a former contributor.
Yes, I'm incredibly excited to be on this side of the equation as a former contributor. And something that excites me about this move that we're seeing away from the dystopian imaginary, because I do think this collection is part of a larger movement that we're seeing in publishing and that we're seeing in media, this reclamation of the utopian impulse, is the opportunity to imagine something different for ourselves. I think so often what we see in dystopian futures is a replication of traumas we've already experienced in a way, and that has a purpose. In many cases, we are trying to sort of expose the realities of those situations, or sort of differentiate them, put them in a new context. So it's not to say that these echoes of our present and our past don't belong in our visions of the future, or that I'm not, as an editor, interested in stories that sort of reproduce power dynamics we've already seen in our world. But I do think that it gets wearying over time, and we've sort of traversed this period of peak global dystopia through the pandemic. And I find myself asking, why is it that in the future, in the moon or in space, why are we still being exploited for our labor, right? Why are we still dealing with exile and assimilation and genocide and tyranny? Sort of in the vastness of what we can imagine for ourselves, why can't we imagine something different? So I'm really excited to see that. I'm excited to see all the different things a hopeful future can mean. I really want to be surprised by the different visions of hope and the different approaches to radical hope. I want people to surprise me with how they locate hope in the vision of our future. And then the last thing I wanted to say was that I really hope to see submissions from Afro-Latinx creatives, from Indigenous Latinx creatives, from queer and trans Latinx creatives, because I also really want to see futures in which our communities are reckoning with or have reckoned with our own systems of anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity and heteronormativity. I think that we need models in our cultures and our societies of what we could look like without this foundation that's been ingrained in us for so long that divides us.
Yeah, well said. I think that's a wrap. I'm just kidding.
I mean, she hit it. She hit it on the head.
That's amazing. Yeah.
I mean, this is why I always say it's always better to collaborate, because if we have one great idea, imagine when you put 3 to 4 people together, right? So what about Alex and Matt? Do you want to add or maybe think about stories that have caught your attention and incited you to think about Radical Hope?
Well, just to, again, I'm not going to compete with Sarah because what she said was perfect. But what I will add is, as a fan of all of you and everybody in the chat, I just want to read great stories, creative stories, stories that aren't like, canned and processed by Hollywood or processed by like big publishers, but something genuine and innovative. And so I just want to read all of your submissions because I am your biggest fan, and I think if I'm excited by your stories and we're excited by your stories, I think our readers will definitely be excited by your stories.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we're all just really excited to see what comes in, and I think that is part of it. This is it is a theme, but it's also pretty generic in some ways, and so it is a call to the community and to see what comes in. I don't think we can guess at this point. I guess the one thing that
being purposefully vague, so that we can cast a wide net. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's more about a kind of like approach or like an energy or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, but definitely the one. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go.
Well, the one thing that I do I want to read is like climate science fiction, environmental science fiction, which mainly because I just feel like I don't have any answers, and maybe it's not the job of fiction to give answers to that, and that's okay as well, and but some kind of like thinking in terms of the environment, because it's in everybody's mind, it's in or in the back of your mind, it's sort of always there, and I just feel like me personally, I don't have like a good standpoint to kind of like think about my place in the environment.
Yeah, I agree. I would like to, and also like taking it back, because if we're going to be playing with futurisms as well as social commentary and history, like, I mean, we have to admit that our abuelitos and our immigrant parents were doing eco-friendly things before it became trendy, right? And now some of us are resorting that to save the planet. So I could definitely see how those storylines can come intertwined in some of these Radical Hope stories, right? Like going back to how we used to be in order to preserve our world, right? And think about like what world we want to leave in the future. I'm particularly happy that the call said that we're accepting stories and writings in Spanish. It's like, I know none of us are speaking Spanish at the moment, but I know that we all can. And being able to read it and process in that way, because I think there's a lot of Spanish writers that sometimes feel like they're doing the extra work to translate when it doesn't necessarily sound the best in English, right? So we encourage folks. I want to read in Spanish. It would be nice to receive some Spanish submissions. But I do want to add to it, like my first Utopia that I read, and I don't know if Matt or Alex or Sada is familiar with this, but is Herland. Has anybody read that?
Yeah.
I always forget her whole name, but let me look it up so I can give you the Charlotte Perkins Gilman, right? And I remember when I read Herland, I was like really thrown off about this Utopia, but I also loved it. I loved it so much. And it what really started me thinking about these alternative stories and worlds. And another one that I love that is really one of the most underread Laura Esquivel books is The Law of Love. Because again, it's like a sci-fi book that most people have never read it or don't even know it exists because like Water for Chocolate really overshadowed all of the rest of her work. And then Malinche, you know. So I feel like those two books I read I think Herland I read when I was 19 and then Law and Love in my 20s at some point. And Law and Love came with a CD and that was like so beyond her time as well. So those were my inspirations for Utopia. Although Law and Love was probably a cross between dystopia and utopia, but they were both very inspiring and refreshing with the themes that they brought forward in conversation, right?
Yeah, well, I wanted to say one thing about the language because I have sort of gone through the what we received already a little bit, and we definitely have a lot of submissions from Mexico, Argentina, Chile. I think the ones from Puerto Rico are in English, but at any rate, the word got out. So that was so that was good. I wasn't sure, you know, and so that's really good news. Nothing from there's a Costa Rican submission. Anyway.
That's so great.
Yeah.
Well, they still have until the 15th to get it in.
Yes.
Yeah, till the 15th. And you know, and so for people who submitted on the first deadline, don't feel like it's going to impact how you're processed, right? And the same thing for people who submit by the 15th. We're not reading until we're getting everything together. We're just making note of how many we had, and that's why we extended the deadline because we want to have more. So I think it's a good time to open questions to the public. So if you do have questions, please put them in the thread. We'll continue to talk, and I know that all four of us, but at the same time, we want to answer questions from folks who might have questions with regards to the submissions or the style of writing. Anything else you all want to chat about while we wait for questions?
Well, one thing I did want to add is about that. Well, I submitted early, or not early, but on time, and then we extended the submission. Like even if you rush to get to the first submission deadline, we always, at least I know I do, but you guys do too. We always get feedback, right? So if a story is great, but it needs a little polishing, we'll definitely give feedback and push it back and have you. So don't feel like you were shortchanged because you got 15 days less. If the story is great, there's still hope. You know, we will help with the polishing.
Yeah, that sounds right. And for sure, if you have a question about that, just contact us and we'll talk it through.
Yeah, there is a question in the thread. It says, can submissions be in English or Spanish, or should they be in Spanish? No, we're accepting English and Spanish and code switching and trans-languaging and Spanglish.
I mean, my native language is Spanglish, so, you know.
We're accepting Chicana Spanish, Peruvian Spanish, Cuban and Puerto Rican Spanish. We're covering all the Spanishes. Any other questions? We got shout outs from Luis, who's also the handles El Man's Bag. Thank you for all that that you folks do. Hope you find what you all need. Much love. And I know they mentioned earlier that they submitted a piece that was inspired by Octavia Butler. So.
Nice.
Wow.
I was going to mention Octavia Butler because we were throwing out some influences that we have in this anthology, and I think that because this is such a kind of emergent genre, people don't know what the models are. So I think that Afrofuturists have been doing this work for a long time, and Octavia Butler is an incredible person to look at. The way she, imagines futures that are violent and are going through difficult times, but is able to sort of find a thread of hope within them. And the anthology Octavia's Brood, that brings together sci-fi and fiction from social justice movements, that brought together activists and sci-fi writers, was hugely influential to me in thinking about this. And there are other anthologies out there within this hopeful vein too. There are solar punk anthologies, which engages with these hopeful climate futures. The GRIST organization's Imagine 2200 series, a lot of great stories with hopeful climate futures. So there are models out there, and we're always happy to give more if you get in contact with us.
There's also a great question. Oh,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say there's a question in the chat. You can read it.
Yes, the question is, can a person submit previously published as part of her collection poems? I think that's.
I would say send it. Yeah, I would say send it for sure.
And it might be a question for their publisher more than for us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a period where you have to like let them have it, but if it's been more than I think 6 months or a year, depending on the contract, so check your contract, check with the previous publisher. But if it's all clear, I would say send it.
Mm-hmm. Great question, Tish. Tish is also part of Women Who Submit, who has been circulating our information for this call.
And I think there was a question about Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
The comment I made, I was just saying that if I remember, the submissions that were coming from Puerto Rico were written in English, but it doesn't matter. English, Spanish, yeah. So
I believe we also put in the call that we were open to indigenous languages. We
yes.
have some translation resources and things like that available. So
yeah, I think
a lot.
Yeah, we are, and I think that that's been there. It was definitely there for speculative fiction for dreamers. I think it just that is the message that didn't get out, I think, enough, because we have not ever received a submission in Mayan or
I would say the rule of thumb is write the story in the language that it needs to be in, right? And the stories take on a life of their own, right? So if the story wants to be in Spanish, you can express yourself better in Spanish, write it in Spanish. If you can express yourself better in English, do it in English. If you can do it in Mayan, do it in Mayan. So let the story dictate the language. Don't try to make it in English because you think you have a better chance of getting published. Let the story kind of organically set the tone.
Yeah, and then there's also like code switching. If you have a character that speaks in one language and another character that speaks in another, that's great too. One more question. Collins, who had the question about Spanish in Puerto Rico, says, thanks, got it. Tish asking a follow-up question. Only one act plays, or can I submit an excerpt from a full-length play?
I think it would totally depend, because we want these to be, readable for people. I think an excerpt might be a little bit difficult because it kind of, I think it takes you out of the reading experience a bit. So that's why, we want a kind of contained work. But I mean, if you have something that you think could fit as a contained work, but is an excerpt, send it and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like we would know otherwise, right?
Yeah.
I think it depends a lot.
Yeah.
I think it depends a lot on the play, right? Because some plays are structured as vignettes, some are, structured as sort of multi-perspectives. And so I think that, if something has a contained arc and can stand on its own as well as being part of something larger, I think we'd be open to that.
Yeah.
Great question. Any other questions? Or if we want to ask ourselves any questions that we think people might be wanting to hear.
I mean, I mean, one of the questions I'm wondering is if people. Actually, I had a number of authors say that they really had trouble thinking about utopian fiction at all, and I totally understand that, you know, and not only because of the dystopian part, but you know, just because it seems like utopian fiction wouldn't be able to get into like the dark parts of humanity, or you know, like a noir kind of scenario, and I'm wondering if we if that muscle is so atrophied that we can hardly even you know think up a utopian kind of story, you know.
I mean, the professor in me loves that. Like, I love that they're struggling with it. I love it's kind of like a no pain, no gain situation. Like struggle with it, because if you're struggling with it and you're the creative one, imagine everybody else, right? So
Yeah.
So I kind of love that. I know it's probably bad and sounds kind of masochistic, but I like that they struggled a little bit. There's value in the struggle.
Yeah.
But I also think like utopians can have some darkness that ends up with hope. So like, I think that's something that asks with like, what is the final message? That it's sometimes you have to get dark before you can show some light and hope, right? I mean, we've all had it, and look where we're at in life, right? Like, so I think that's a great point to bring up.
I think that fear is an incredibly primal, powerful part of all of us, and part of narrative, and that it's very easy and natural to go to fear first, fear about the future. And we have so many more models for those kinds of stories. They've been so prevalent in literature, global literature, for so long, and in global media, in movies, and you know, video games and everything. So I understand too, like, people can get hung up on the word utopia, right? On the idea of perfect society rather than society still in flux, or still striving for something better. Because we have had for a long time, even in dystopian fiction, a thread of hope. What Tom Moylan called the critical dystopia, so many stories we've been seeing for the last 20 or 30 years tend to end with a thread of hope, even if that hope is tenuous or ambiguous, or it's just a road out of whatever situation we're in. So stories exist that have that thread of hope, and I guess we're trying to make that thread more prevalent in these stories and see if we can expand the middle.
And one of the things that I think about when people say things like, writing a utopia is hard because the perfect society, but humans are humans, right? People were people 5,000 years ago, and they're going to be people 5,000 years from now. You know, we survived the climate thing. So even if the society is perceived, right, by some members of that society as perfect, there's still going to be interpersonal drama. There's still going to be human emotions coming into play. So you can still write like kind of those like darker elements of human nature in a utopia, right? Because human nature is still going to be human nature, unfortunately. But that's where the fuel for the story, right? Like the story dynamic is going to kick in.
And you know, that kind of reminds me of a story from speculative fiction for dreamers, the Flowers Through Concrete, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that it's quasi-utopian, you know, it's kind of like a rural family story, but in the background is like utter destruction. You know, there probably was a nuclear war or something. You know, and so that's another way of thinking about it, is coming out of these horrible, you know, uh, you know, destructive moments. You know, is there a way to move forward and figure out some hope out of that? So that's another way of thinking about it. You know, it doesn't have to be a kind of like floating in the sky utopia, but something that grows out of death and destruction.
Yeah. So Alex, you got a shout out. It said very kung fu, Alex, when you were
Oh,
talking.
that there's value in the struggle.
Yeah.
That's probably what it was.
It's a Google. And then we did get a question if it was, are we recording this and will it be posted somewhere? And like, yes, we're on IG Live now, but it gets downloaded to IGTV and it'll live in Libro Obeid's IGTV section. So, and then therefore people can share it and rewatch it if they want to. All right, anything else should we add?
I wanted to say in response to what Matt was talking about, that sometimes I think it helps to start with something as simple as a question that you have about the future, a what if this happened, and more than often, like more often than not, the answer will be really complicated and you'll probably end up with kind of a complex world that you're exploring. But I think that this hopeful impulse begins so often just with the willingness to ask these questions about our future. I think a lot about how in 2020, 2021, a lot of people here in the US were kind of learning about abolitionism for the first time, even though abolitionists have been doing anti-prison work for so long, and how in kind of the public consciousness, even just this question of what would a world look like without prisons was something people weren't even willing to ask, right? Because it was something that they hadn't known. And so I think that a real power of these kinds of stories is taking that first step of asking and imagining and seeing where that can take us.
Sometimes that can be done in a pivot, right? We don't have to say these things didn't exist in the past. There could definitely be reminders of this history, of this moment when we did live like that, right? And then we have this other world and becomes like almost like a parallel universe, right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess, you know, the other part is, you know, every social movement has some utopian energy behind it, you know. And I feel like the movements of the present, many of them lack that part, you know, and maybe with good reason. But I think it's so central to the movements that have changed things in the past that it's worth, at least looking at again and asking the question, the basic question about it. Even Aztlan, you know, the Chicano nation is, despite its problems, it has that kind of like utopian ideal behind it, you know.
Yeah,
The civil rights movement. I mean, so.
Yeah, I love that comment we got on formerly known as Twitter, where somebody retweeted our stuff and said, "Oh, I wonder if I can finally submit that non-Aslan story." And I was like, "Yeah, I want to read a non-Aslan story."
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I feel like we've been talking a lot about stories, so I want to reiterate that this is an interdisciplinary anthology and that we are taking plays and poems and graphic arts, and something like a poem, you know, doesn't have to be, maybe you don't have to grapple with this question of, you know, how do I create a narrative of hope? Maybe you create just a vision or a moment or a glimpse of hope, and that can be enough. So
yeah, thanks for sharing that, because some of my favorite pieces also in speculative fiction for dreamers is the poetry.
Mhm.
There's a lot of poetry and speculative fiction for Dreamers, and I think we have 3 comics in it as
Yeah.
well. Latinx Rising has one like photonovela. So yeah, totally. We want that. You know, we want that. That it provides kind of a texture to an anthology, I think. And we all love poetry and fiction and art and photography, and so why not put it all in?
So Matt, did you want to clarify with the graphic arts too, what we're accepting within that, maybe like comics or standalone images?
Well, I think with the comics and speculative fiction for Dreamers, we definitely were looking for at least the narrative ones that had a kind of arc, you know, a beginning, middle, and end, and because there is a kind of tendency with comics to have an excerpt, you know, so we did want that part, you know, a story within that. That's what we were looking for. I think, yeah, it definitely doesn't need to be narrative, though. You know, I'm not sure that we had a graphic image in speculative fiction for Dreamers that was not narrative, but I mean, I would love that. So if you have that, please send it. Yeah. I don't know. Did that seem right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
we're
again,
open for everything.
correct. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was gonna say, when in doubt, send it in. You know, and let us kind of decide and argue with each other, and
Yeah.
bounce it around.
Yeah.
Don't make the call and then not send it in, because what if it's exactly what we're looking for? You know,
Yeah.
just send it in if if you've got something that you feel fit the theme, and it's great. You know.
And we've all got a lot of interdisciplinary experience. We have lots of, visual arts experience. And so if we love your work, we will advocate for it.
Right.
Definitely. And then we have another question. It says, in terms of art, color, black and white, question mark.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, like we definitely would lean toward black and white, because these anthologies, they happen through at least the first 2 through Kickstarters, and you know, the first time published through an independent press, and a very small independent press, and then academic presses, university presses. So they don't have a lot of money, and they're trying to cut corners, and color images is not is not on the top of their list of things they want, even though I would love it, and at least in the first one I tried to fight for a bit, but yeah, ultimately they have their own limits that we have to work with.
Matt,
Yeah.
what if we say submit your art, if it's in color first, right? Submit it in color, but also submit it in black and white, because one of the things that we talked about is integrating the digital humanities, right? And how we can do that. And if they submit something that can definitely portray what we want in black and white, but it's originally in color, maybe we add a QR code, and visitors can go see it from their phone and colored through a landing page, that you already have created, right? Maybe
that's a great idea.
That way, but remember, it has to stand alone in black and white too. That's the hard part, right? Because if it's going to be in print, but if it's a color image or a black and white image that stands alone and you want to convert it to color, that's how we can be creative and include color images, right? And that's something that I'm always pushing for, is like, how can we get more digital humanities stuff in books, because we're so limited to the page, but there's so many things we can do with finding alternative ways and spaces, right? And that's what this is, sci-fi. And so maybe we can play around with QR codes and expanding the landing pages for the project through that. And that I feel like we got through something today.
Yeah. I feel accomplished.
Yeah. Well, we're down to our last few minutes, 9 minutes. Any more general questions? Maybe, Sada, is there a question that you had when you contributed to speculative fiction for Dreamer that you felt you didn't get an answer to, that you like understand a lot better about the process? And I put you on the spot, I'm sorry.
No, that's actually a really great question. I think one thing that came up for me was that I sort of assumed that, you know, the call was looking for people who were Latinx or who had a Latinx connection. And I submitted, I don't remember how many stories I submitted, but 2 of them got accepted. And I think one of them wasn't kind of that Latinx focused. And so especially for this one, because we are specifically looking for like Latinx visions of the future, we are looking for people who identify as Latinx or who have, you know, a deep connection to Latinx communities. That's my understanding. If Matt or Alex, you have a correction for that, let me know. And I think that we're really going to be looking for stories that center the Latinx experience in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big issue, a big topic for discussion, which we probably can't go through it all. But I definitely, I mean, for me, the first step in is it's about the people, you know, more than anything. And if their vision is a particular way, then that's their vision, you know. And I would lean toward like the artist or author in terms of identity, and what that looks like is their creative decision, you know.
Yeah, I agree with that, Matt. I think that's the best way to put it. It's like, I don't think we always have to talk deeply about our culture, right? Like in our writing, because I definitely don't want anyone to feel typecasted, because I felt that before. But it definitely is more about the connection from the writer versus the writer's characters or the writer's style of writing, right? And that's what's more important to me, because we don't always have to write about our culture to be writers, right?
So now we know that Sarah's still sore that she didn't get 3 stories published. Like,
no, I'm really glad you didn't
keeping score.
Huh? I'm really glad you didn't. It was not good.
All right. Any last questions from our folks watching? We still have a little bit over 10 folks watching. And I know, shout out to David back at Cal State Fullerton from Zine to the Future is on there. Huge supporter of our work, I have to say. And so, and his comment is, look forward to reading it.
Yeah, that's our job, is to get another book on his shelf, for sure.
You know how, did I ever tell you that I went to the library and I just happened to bump into our book on display at the exhibit? I was like, hey,
oh, wow.
that's my book. Yeah, it was really exciting. Yeah, and then we had a great panel with, you know, with, oh my gosh, I can't think, Diana Burbano and Rachel Cruz, who blurbed our first speculative fiction for Dreamers. So it was very well received in Orange County and Cal State Fullerton.
I mean, just one thing, and I don't know if I should be admitting this, but whenever I go into random libraries, I find her book and I put it on display, even though it's not my library.
Well, yeah, you're a librarian, you know the secret code.
I feel like I can do that.
yeah, for sure, yeah.
Oh, we have a comment that says, I like this despite hearing how hard it is for people to envision a utopia or a current reality. It takes a step away from the stereotype of Latinx stories being ones of tragedies to learn from. Yeah, I always feel like I don't always have to I don't always want to read a struggle story. You know?
Same.
Yeah, good comments coming out. Okay, so I think we're down to our last 4 minutes, and I said during this time, all we're going to do is give words of encouragement and goodbyes. So let's say some words of encouragement. Submit, submit, submit. We want to hear from you, and in every form or structure that you want to submit your work.
If you're not 100% sure if something is ready, like Matt was saying earlier, we are, or I think Alex was saying, we're good to like kick it back and work with you on it if we really love the raw material that's there. So yeah, send it anyway. And please share, like send our call to anyone you know who might be interested, share it on social media. That'll be really helpful for us.
I guess my only thing would be if you have a kind of idea in your head or an image, don't question it, because it may be the kinds of stories and art that we need for this anthology are just totally new, and they may come out of nowhere. And so please don't edit yourself before you get it out.
Yeah, we definitely like weird, weird, strange stories that don't kind of fit a mold. So even like stories that are like live in the middle of a Venn diagram of like different genres, send those, like that's maybe that's where the answer is, right? In the middle of like multiple genres. So don't be afraid to get weird.
And remember, you can still email with questions until the 15th. And one of the things that we pride ourselves on, I think all of us, is that we're very equitable when we're reading stuff. I know it'd be my first experience working with Sada, but if Matt and Alex have brought her in is because they have full trust. And my experience with speculative fiction has been the best co-editing experience I've ever had in my life, and that says a lot. So when we read as a collective, and when we discuss things together. So note that is happening.
Yep.
All right, then. It was nice sharing space with all of you, and I look forward to doing the final count on August 15th, or August 16th, really, of how many submissions we got. So thank you for taking time today, all three of you, and I look forward to collaborating more. And thank you to everyone that tuned in.
Bye.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye. This will be on our IGTV. We can share it still. All right. Bye.